Now, when you begin writing a family story, there are a few must haves to include in your family stories, and then there are several guiding principles to make a good story. So, we're going to talk very basic on what should you put into your family story. Well, every family story should have three things. First, they need to have a who, and that who is your ancestor or yourself. But the who also includes the people that impacted their lives. So it's going to be not just who, but it's going to be their parents, their siblings, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors, their coworkers. Just who. Lots and lots of who. But after you write your first draft, then you can determine the scope of your project. Maybe you won't need all the who's that could possibly be part of their story, but it's always best to have too much and then reduce for the scope of your project than not enough. So the first thing is a who. The next thing is what you know about these people. This is going to be everything that can help you differentiate between same name individuals. So you want to know everything about Paul Smith the dentist versus Paul Smith the newspaperman versus Paul Smith the farmer. Now, that's enough to kind of get it started, but what else do you know about them? Do you know what property they owned, what taxes they paid, what debt they had, what court cases they were involved in, who migrated from one place to another, who had multiple wives, so on and so forth. So what do you know about that ancestor? And finally, where did they live? It may seem a little obvious, but it's best to make sure that we cover that topic. Where did they live? And try to get as narrow as possible to a specific home so you can talk about the structure of that home and how close the neighbors were, how distant they were from when they went shopping, and how distant were they from when they went to church or to work, and so forth. So, who, what do you know, and where do they live? After that, there's some other things you need to incorporate. All of the details that you put into your story should do one of three things. They need to either inform, engage with somebody, or entertain. So I wanted to go beyond something that looks like Robert Victor Zumstein was born on the 26th of December, 1896 in Gainsborough, Lincoln County, Ontario, when his father was... So yeah, that's something you know about him, but let's take it a step further and add more descriptive details. You can go into describing what Victor looked like. Victor, when he was in the military, in his young adult years, he had a smallpox scar on his forehead. When he was an adult, he was practically bald. You can also tell about the time when he shared... He would carry pocketfuls of quarters, and whenever he visited family, he would give coins to his grandson's cousins from the other side of the family. He would give them coins too. It didn't really matter. He loved to spoil children. So that is something that engages and entertains and informs you a little more than just a simple details. The next thing you want to do is describe the world in which your ancestor lived. History becomes less boring, like they teach in public school or in college, when you start putting your ancestors in that time and place. So whenever I think about the Great Depression, I actually get a little bit of a different story depending on who I'm thinking about. When I'm thinking about Andy's grandma, Jeanette, oh, I love Jeanette, and she passed away this year, but love this woman. She said, I didn't know we were in Great Depression. We were poor. We weren't any more poor than we already were, so we were just poor. Meanwhile, my grandma Louise, when I asked her about the Great Depression, she's like, I didn't really remember it because it didn't really affect where we lived. And then I did some social history research and discovered, yeah, not every part of the world really, the United States really suffered that dramatically, like all of the dramatic images that we see and associate with the Great Depression. And so we need to describe their world so we really understand instead of assume, oh, the Great Depression and they were in soup lines. Well, I had one ancestor, well, they were always in the poorhouse lines. And then I know of another one who like, it didn't really change our lives. We still led a comfortable life. And maybe she was poor, but I really don't think so, because her father was a stenographer and then a bank clerk. And so in the banking industry, he was worried, but it really didn't cause a lot of struggle in her life. She struggled more because her mom died and had the loss of her mom at the age 13. So there's a lot of things that we can learn about describing the world, and especially their experiences with that world. Now you can read this example of describing the world over on my blog, but I'll go ahead and read the sample here. Just south of downtown Columbus, English speakers entered a foreign environment. Red brick houses, some 2 stories, others not, line both sides of the brick road. You're greeted with Guten Tag from Herr Schreck and Frau Geschaber. I can't say those German names, I'm sorry. The community amenities featured the red brick Gothic-style St. Mary's Catholic Church with Reverend Francis Speck as pastors. Residents read the Der Westbots newspaper for stories about their neighbors and the Palatinate and Baden homelands. Describe their world. Now, if you want to go see how badly I butchered those names, you can go over to the blog, and I have it written there, and then we can all talk about how poorly I speak German. The next thing we want to do is to tell the truth. One thing that separates family histories from legends and fiction is that there's a heavy emphasis on truth. Now, we don't want to be so dry and stuffy that it's just, a research report and here's a fact and here's a citation, here's a fact and here's a citation, and this is how I solved the problem of that. That's a research report, and we're talking about family histories. We want to tell a story. Many stories suggest customs and beliefs of the past were wrong because they don't adhere to modern beliefs, and we need to be very, very careful that we don't project our views of people of the past, okay? Yes, today we may think it's wrong, but when we're writing this story, we can't write judgment into our stories, because 10, 15, 20, 30, even 50 years from now, people are going to say what we did was wrong, and I don't know that we can hold up to that type of scrutiny. Be careful that you tell the truth according to what they were experiencing, and try to keep your bias out of that. Additionally, our saints were not complete saints. I said that wrong. Our ancestors weren't complete saints, and they weren't complete sinners. Meaning, you're going to have some ancestors that did some really great things, and they're going to sound perfect in every way, but they probably did some not so great things. And to keep them human rather than some unapproachable, iconic, unachievable relative, make sure that you tell the well-rounded story. Maybe they were so great because they learned from these mistakes. And the flip goes for our ancestors that did some not so great thing. Depending on your perspective, there are some pretty villainous people in history who had people that saw their good side. They weren't complete villains, so make sure we tell the truth. The next thing you want to do is show and don't tell in your family stories. So go and find imagery, graphics, pictures of things and places and people. Get genealogical documents. I love when I see genealogy documents, newspaper clippings, headlines, editorials. You don't always have to have a story about your ancestor in order to tell about the world in which they lived. A lot of times the editorial cartoons, whether your ancestor appreciated it or not, can help you know how the world was judged by some of the critics of the time. Get digitized copies of signatures. I love to be able to see signatures of my ancestors, particularly in the time period where there are no photographs. It's like, they wrote that name, they wrote this thing, which leads us to letters. Digitize letters and put those in your family histories. You can put maps and drawings and timelines and all sorts of things in order to really make your story stand out and be approachable and enjoyable. If you want some tips and tricks on how to take your writing to the next level, if you want some inspiration by reading some writing samples, be sure you go over to my blog. That is over at familyhistoryfanatics.com. Click on the blog link and drop down to the filter of writing tips, and there you'll be